Welcome to the third session in our online conference, and we're looking today at performance management tools. So just like to put up the agenda for you. Delighted to be joined by two speakers. We've got Chris Rainsforth from the forum. Welcome to you, Chris.
Welcome, Johnny. Thank you for having me. I'm very much looking forward to this morning.
And you're going to be looking at the sort of, if you like, the human sides of performance management.
Yeah, performance management is one of those things where it's a balance between process and people. So I'm gonna kind of cross over both, but focus on the people more so. Excellent.
And Jeremy, Jeremy Payne from Enghouse Interactive. Welcome to the call. And you're going to be talking about performance management tools.
Yeah, that's right, John T. We're going to do a little bit of set the context in terms of goals, KPIs, then start to look at some of the approaches, and then spin on to some of the technologies that are out there, and then wrap up with a couple of real life examples of before and after.
Excellent. And if you're not wanting to, if you're wanting to share this with your teams. Callcenterhelper.com recorded webinars. We'll have a replay available later on in about an hour after the end of the session today. If you're not already logged into our chat room, the address here is callcenterhelper.com/chat. And we'll be going through quite a lot of detail today. So if you want to get hold of the webinar slides, you can use this link. If you want to download the chat log, you can download it from here. And if you have a tip or a question, you can type it into here. There's an added advantage for typing in a tip in particular, is that there is a rather nice bottle of champagne or a box of chocolates for the best tip. We've already shipped 2 out so far this conference. So just use the hashtag tip into the question box here. Or if you've got any questions, you can add those in. We've got a question that we're discussing in the chat room, and that question is: how many interactions, could be calls, emails, and web chats, do you monitor each month, and how many per advisor do you monitor per month? We've had varying answers so far, ranging from about 25% of incoming communication, says Rana, 1% says Raluca, 5% says Andrew. We've got about 5% says Andrew, though that's also limited by the ability to monitor chat and emails. I find that often calls get monitored a lot, but emails and web chats tend not to be. So if you'd just like to type that into the chat room. While you're doing that, I'd just like to pull up a poll, and I'd like to ask the question: which performance management tools do you use today? Do you use spreadsheets? Do you use call recordings? Do you use agent evaluation software? Do you use speech analytics? Do you use workforce management software? So Chris, any idea which ones you think will come out as most popular?
Call recordings, I would assume. Spreadsheets would be the top 2. I think we're seeing more and more agent evaluation software. Speech analytics kind of grows and stalls. Seems to be cyclic. So yeah, there'll be a range of everything, but call recording should be high up there, I would assume.
Okay, well let's have a look at the results, and quite interesting here. 80% of people using spreadsheets, 75% using call recordings. Agent evaluation software quite low there at 13%. 4% on speech analytics. That seems to be smaller than what I would expect for a normal sample in the call center space, and 22% using workforce management software. Jeremy, that seems this is sort of lower than I would expect. Does that tie in with your findings?
Yeah, it's pretty much what I would have expected. I think you expect people to be doing call recordings. There is a degree of workforce management software out there, and I suspect there's a crossover between people that are doing workforce management on a spreadsheet. So yeah, it's not a complete surprise. Possibly the agent evaluation software we might have expected to be a little bit higher, and possibly workforce management might have been a little bit higher. But yeah, there's an awful lot of spreadsheets out there.
Okay, well, let's have a look at what people are doing in terms of monitoring interactions. Let's have a look. Charlie says we monitor 2 interactions per person per month per channel, which he says is nowhere near enough. Paul says between 2 to 6 per person per month. Colin says 3 to 5 per person per month. Mark has said we do 5 calls per agent per month and 5 emails per agent per month. I think that's starting to get to a more representative sample. Terry says our team leaders are targeted with 120 checks per month. That's quite nice actually to target your team leaders on a target. I guess if you've got a team of 8, that's a decent number. If you've got a team of 20, that's a little bit at the low end. But that probably ensures that Chris would ensure that by targeting the team leaders that the actual monitoring does get done.
Yeah, I think the key bit is that accountability. So, and if you're setting them a target in terms of overall number, it gives you a little bit of autonomy and accountability to focus on the key element. So you might not want to focus on every individual, but you might want to look at themes, types of calls that are coming through, whether they're long, short, being escalated up into a complaints process. So you can start to focus on potentially more insightful reviews and monitoring in the wider performance piece rather than a specific individual. So I think it gives a nice balance.
So that's probably a good point in the proceedings to hand across to you, Chris. And if you'd like to share with us your thoughts on the sort of human sides of performance management tools. Yeah,
thank you, Johnny. So everyone should be able to see me. I'm just going to get rid of that for a second. Right, so everyone see my screen okay? There you go, perfect. So thank you. Good morning, everybody. I've narrowed it down to 10 top tips. These are my tips. I assume there will be 100 other tips, so I'm expecting quite a bit of activity within the chat room in terms of being challenged on some of these things, in terms of your own top tips. So please go on the chat room and get involved in that discussion. Performance management to me is a critical role in any industry, but specifically in the contact center and where we're focusing today. If we're leaders of people, it is a critical element of our role, and it is a very much a balance between a skill. As a leader, you need to be skilled in performance management, and also a process. And we'll cross over a little bit between the tips. So it'll kind of focus on some of them. And I think as we move into a more digital world, that performance management as a business will become more important, especially as we strip out some of the lower value contact, and we're expecting our people to deliver more complex and more business critical interactions. So I think we just need to be really mindful of that as we move forward. So my first tip is a simple one, and shouldn't come to any surprise for anybody, but around setting clear expectations. One of the most significant blockers we find to effective performance management is a lack of clarity around what is expected of me. And people generally won't be able to perform to the required standard if they're unsure about what that standard is. And one of the biggest singular mistakes we make is that assuming people just know what they're expected of and what we can do. And the key thing is that we should never assume about that. We should ensure that our expectations are clearly explained. We should be checking understanding continually, and you know, if I'm being performance manager, I should be challenging those assumptions. So, you know, making sure I'm really clear, taking accountability for my own performance to kind of push back and make sure that I am very clear when I set out about going about my day-to-day role, that I know what I'm aiming to achieve. It's got to work two ways: the expectation setting between the leader and the person that's being coached or being developed. They should have a real two-way discussion to make sure accountability is out. So yeah, so the first thing is around setting clear expectations. My second point is around individuality, and treating people as an individual. You know, everybody's different and they'll respond different to various different approaches. These distinctions between individuals have to be taken account when managing performance. What works well with one person may not work so well with another. And although we're trying to achieve the same outcome, in terms of performance, and if you've got a kind of standard suite of KPIs or performance indicators that we're aiming for all that we try to get to the same point, we can't all necessarily get there in the same way. So people will work at a different pace, they'll react to things differently, and they'll need different stimuli to get them where they need to be. So as people, leaders, managing performance, we need to be really aware of our teams and the individuals in those teams and make sure we get the best out of them. My next point is around regular feedback, and it seems common sense in terms of what we're trying to do, but it's something that requires constant attention. People or managers or leaders that really excel at managing performance, they don't wait until the quarterly review or the annual appraisal or whatever it might be. They will manage that performance on a regular and informal basis. And then when they do come to a time where it's a formal meeting to review performance, there's no surprises. People know how they're performing. They can use that time then really effectively to drive forward in terms of goals, in terms of expectations, all that type of stuff. So we should always be looking at that and always be thinking around that feedback. We shouldn't be saving it and waiting for an appropriate time or a scheduled time to do it, because especially if it's about poor performance or people are unsure of how they're doing, that if we wait, we can compound the problem. So we just need to be careful. There's a kind of step I try to take, that there should be 3 points in your head as you're going through that feedback loop. That there should always be some kind of quarterly review against objectives. So that could be your kind of step 1. Step 2, think about what's happening weekly and more of the kind of, how are things going, that kind of test bed, that informal discussion. And then the third thing to keep in mind is ASAP, that ASAP feedback, that we recognise good performance or we correct performance that's dipping, and we do that immediately rather than waiting. So if you can keep those kind of 3 steps in mind, it kind of helps you generate a kind of a continuous improvement cycle in your mind around giving feedback. So always keep those 3 steps there. The next point or next tip that I kind of think is it's around sticking to the date. And I this is one of my biggest bugbears, and I know we spoke about this in the past, Johnny, but we can't expect our people to really engage with development if the time we set aside for development is deemed as not a priority. And I think as a business, if we, on one hand, in our industry or in our organisation, are saying we want to be the best in our chosen industry or field or whatever we want to be. So if our mission is to be the best, but every time we have any performance development, training, coaching scheduled, is the first thing to be cancelled or rescheduled or pushed back, then that for me is just a conflict. The 2 don't add up. And think about the consequences of continually deprioritising development. What does that mean to people? What does that mean in terms of your overall business performance? If you know you've got poor performers or you know you're not performing to a required standard and you continue to rearrange development, people aren't ever going to get any better. And it also puts us in a really difficult situation moving forward, that if, in some cases, that performance review, or we do have to manage someone more closely for their performance because they are required. It can open up HR issues with our kind of trade unions and all those types of things, because we're not sticking to what we're agreeing to as an organisation in terms of giving people the development they need to achieve the expectation and standards that we're setting. So it's got to be something that we put really high on an importance level and make sure we follow through on it continually. And that leads into kind of how we give feedback. So making sure it's regular and all that, and making sure it happens is critical. But then it's about providing balance. To get the best from people, we must maximise the use of that kind of praise and positive reinforcement, for want of a better phrase. But this doesn't mean that we ignore any negative aspects of performance, but the focus should be on how we can improve it. It's really easy for us, as it's human nature in the most sense, for us to focus on the negative, especially as kind of coaches or managers. We focus on the things that we aren't doing particularly well, and it's just as easy for us then to brush over the good points of people's performance. But let's make sure we provide that balance. So I'll put there the feedback sandwich is old hat, and I'm happy to be challenged on that. But that kind of old thing of going, sandwiching a positive with two negatives, or vice versa in some cases. It's just, be really balanced in what you do, and focus on the outcome. I always say, if we are as leaders trying to motivate, inspire, and improve our performance, focus on the outcomes that we want, focus on the goals that we're expecting, and what we can do to get there, and set those expectations, and maintain the process that sits behind it. So so finding balance is critical.
And Nick Drake Knight, who does a lot of work on performance coaching, wrote an article for us a number of years ago called the 5 phrases a call center manager should never use. And one of those was what he calls the but monster, which is the word but. So you're doing really well in your job, but. Yeah. And effectively anything before the phrase but is ignored, but psychologically you ignore all the good stuff that's been said and just focus on the but. So he says, really avoid that sort of labouring on the bad that is so easy to do.
Yeah, and I think we do it a lot where we see it where you might have an hour's worth of development time and 55 minutes of it is spent focusing on what you're not doing too well, and then right at the last couple of minutes you're going, oh, but by the way, that was very good, so I'll keep doing that bit. But you've just lost it because you've spent 50 minutes completely criticising someone's performance. So it's got to be balanced in its way, and in fairness, the accountability to some degree should sit on the person that's sitting there to going, where do you want to improve, where do you feel that you're struggling, and asking those types of questions to draw out where you can support people is critical. The kind of next thing then, so once we've got the feedback and we know what's doing, it's around that support and development. So supporting people to achieve their full potential is the role of any good leader. This support could come in the form of mentoring, coaching, training, giving them a different task to do, seconding them out to different roles within the business, but looking at that kind of development opportunities that are there. It's no good as a leader to simply just say someone's falling short of the mark. We have to then put in a development plan, or some kind of plan of action that will address those issues, and what's available within your organisation to help do that, in terms of additional training, coaching, etc. And then conversely, we if the people that are performing well, they need some kind of opportunity or incentive, for want of a better phrase, to continue to perform at that high level. We sometimes forget about those people that are performing well, and we push them to one side, and we see it quite a bit just in the way we sometimes do development, where we focus on the bottom 10%, or all that type of stuff happens regularly, where we're naturally focusing on the poor performers, and the guys at the top kind of are left alone to get on with it. But there'll be people in there that will eventually become demotivated because they're feeling that they're not being recognised for the good work that they're doing. So just be really mindful of that when you're putting your development plans in place. Couple left. So the kind of next thing then would be around consistency and the framework of consistency. And I think this is the bit that kind of goes wrong. We have a process within our organisation's performance management, but it's not applied consistently within department or across department. And if we've got this framework, it will ensure consistency at all levels, but it'll also, if I move from one team to another, then there shouldn't be any break in my development. There shouldn't be any stall in that. I should move into a kind of seamless transition from one to the other because everyone's bought into it. And you see it often where, there'll be a leader or a manager that's on top of the process and they're managing poor performance, and the people that are doing well are off doing, standing duties somewhere else, and there'll be another team that's the manager or leader's not kind of maintaining the framework, and the poor performers are getting away with poor performance, for want of a better phrase, and the top performers are getting demotivated because they can see other people in the business being given opportunities because their manager or leader is following the framework consistently. And I think that's one of the key things in terms of the process side of it, and in terms of driving motivation and in terms of driving buy-in to any type of performance management structure, is that it has to be applied consistently across all levels in the business. So it becomes important, it becomes part of the DNA of the organisation. People know where they stand, they know that if they move from one to another, that's going to continue, and they can set their aspirations and future career goals knowing that they're going to get trained and developed in a similar way throughout the process. So we've got to take accountability for that process and make sure that we're all delivering it consistently. The next one is a bit of a contentious point, and I've had this discussion a few times in terms of thinking about your performance incentives. Now, we incentives were derived from the psychology around behaviourism, and read upon it for those that haven't read upon it. But behaviourism, it's all around kind of all human behaviours as a result of external conditioning, and we put performance incentives in place as an external stimuli to encourage a behaviour and encourage a higher level of performance, all that type of stuff. And they can work in the right environment, and they can work in the right culture. There is evidence though that it can drive a negative behaviour. People can find shortcuts, or they're chasing a meaningless KPI because that's the KPI they're bonused on, but doesn't necessarily impact your customer service. So there's a couple of examples. British Gas in 2011 looked at their sales conversion, and they did a lot of work using speech analytics to identify the kind of effectiveness of sales, and they found very, very quickly and very clearly that even the people that were getting the most incentive in terms of hitting their conversion rate and getting the monetary reward for that weren't driving the right behaviour. So they were overselling, they were selling the wrong products, they were doing it to chase the conversion rate as opposed to actually making sure the customer had the right outcome. So and that's because it hit their wallet positively at the end of the month. So it's just been really balanced on that. We saw in 2015 LV removed individual commission and moved everyone into the kind of annual company bonus scheme, and they saw an increase in CSAT, the cost savings, and it helped them streamline their performance indicators. But what it really helped them do was focus on the right outcomes for the customer, not just the sales. Focus on the outcome and all that. So think about your incentives that you've got in place. What are the pros and cons for your environment? Are they driving the right behaviour? And could the investment that you've got be offset somewhere else in terms of people's development and how they get that reward? The kind of last two as we move through, and Jeremy will speak about these, but utilise the tools that are available to you. Use that insight to enable the balanced feedback we've talked about, highlight development areas, create meaningful metrics based on the tools. And if you've invested in these things as an organisation, then let's use them. We live in a really technology-rich industry and in a very technology-rich world, so we should be utilising these things to their utmost to make sure it's as advantageous as possible, and engage your teams around these things. If they can self-serve their performance information, if they can take accountability through dashboards, they can see that. We're seeing gamification becoming really kind of prevalent now in different organisations. So just use the tools that are there to really engage people around development so they can move forward at a pace. The final point, and it is the final point, is just practice what we preach. So as leaders, we can't be a hypocrite. Behaviour breeds behaviour. We cannot expect others to be accountable for their performance if we don't apply those practices ourselves. So let's make sure that if we are wanting to drive performance within our organisations, that we kind of live by the mantra we're setting ourselves. So that's it, Johnny. That is my final tip.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Chris. Some great insight and lots of discussion going on in the chat room. Lots of comments, lots of questions, and we'll go across now and have a look at some of the feedback that's coming through. So the first tip we've had is be regular and consistent. Advisors will not respond to occasional feedback or moving goalposts, even if the expectations are set early. I think that ties in very well with what you you've been saying, Chris. Question has come in from Emma. I found a lot of focus on hitting a completion target, such as 5 call monitoring sessions, for instance, per week. However, no focus on the feedback. There's a variety of thoughts on the floor for this. So the question is, do you feedback after each and every evaluation before completing the next? Feedback 2 at the time, or do you wait for a monthly one-on-one? What would your advice be on that, Chris?
I think it's about so as regular as you can. So I think if you come across something, and I think it's about the target that's been set. So if you've been set a target, it goes back to if we chase a number, we'll go for the number and all that type of stuff. So we see it regular, regardless of what we're doing. So I would focus on the outcome. So the target, the completion target, should be a secondary bit. The actual performance target for you as a team leader should be around the outcome that you're trying to drive by that. So what is the level of performance? So then it doesn't matter how many you're doing, it matters that we're driving the right outcome. So then when we're listening to the calls or reviewing the interactions by whatever channel they come from, if we're not delivering the outcome on those interactions, we should be then feeding that back immediately, I think, and then and giving that positive reinforcement that people are doing it well. And like I said, if you're having that regular ASAP correction and kind of recognition piece as you're going through it, no one's surprised then when you do sit down in your weekly one-to-one or your monthly one-to-one, what feedback they're going to get, because you've already had some discussion about it leading up to it.
And Jeremy, there's a tip in from Terry that says managers need good tools to performance manage, but need to use them as tools. But the human element is the key to inspire the team to succeed. Even someone who is underperforming can be turned around with great management. I know that you've always been a great believer in the tools only do part of it. You've got to get the human factors right as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it was, as Chris kind of, or at the start of the session, you talked about the but word. You can have the best, performance management tools and monitoring systems in place that give you sort of really, great data to multiple decimal points. But if the delivery of that feedback is not done in a timely way, in the right way, in a human way, really the data and all the work that you've put in to get that is irrelevant. So yeah, there's the tools, like most things to do with software and technology, is only ever half the story.
Indeed. Well, Charlie says we target on improving customer satisfaction rather than giving a target on the volume of coaching feedback sessions. That sounds a bit similar to the previous one. This way, the managers, coaches can do as much or as little as they want, but their main and only aim or target is to improve CSAT. I guess the danger then is that if there's a target on CSAT, the danger is that you could then potentially not do some of those coaching sessions. Let's have a look at what else we've got. Andrew, don't try and put everything on your managers. Managers should not do all the number crunching and then do the coaching split. This element and do the coaching. Split this element out and ensure they are natural coaches first. Keep it simple for them. Chris, have you got any guidance on whether the quality team should do the quality or whether the coaches should do the coaching, or how that splits?
I think there has to be a balance. So I think you're right. But I think, if we are people to lead a team, then they have to take accountability and responsibility for that leading of team. I think they should be given some support in terms of getting to the information and the data. But I believe that the thing that misses is that we sometimes forget about our managers, and as we move them into more of a coaching role, we kind of forget about them and don't invest in them enough to ensure they have the skill, they have the ability to coach and mentor and develop people. So does have to be a balance, and it's finding the right balance for your organisation, I would say.
Indeed. Well, let's have a look. Paul says, I send feedback via email if the performance is strong and have an immediate one-to-one if the performance drops below a 70% expectation score. That's interesting. And we've got a question that's come in from Charlie saying, I think this is to your point about the feedback. How do you find a balance with the feedback without it becoming a sandwich?
Focus on the outcome. So I think the key thing is, what are you trying to achieve when you're dealing with customers? So what is the expectation? So driving and looking at the outcome will provide balance naturally, because you're looking at what the end goal is, and not looking back at what they potentially did or didn't do well. You're kind of looking at going, okay, so how do we get to where our desired outcome is? And that should naturally create balance. Look forward, not behind.
One of the techniques I've also seen is one of, rather than sort of putting the criticisms in, saying, how did you feel that interaction went? And let the agent expand that and say, so how could you have done that differently, that call? And then the advisor will then just sort of offer up what they can do, and then follow up by, so what actions do we need to diarise before our next meeting? So there's no criticism, it's just asking some open questions, and people can become their own critics, and then just giving, I really love that particular bit. So just keeping it all very positive. Jeremy, you're nodding there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think allowing most people instinctively know when they're doing the right thing and when they're doing the wrong thing, and allowing people give people the opportunity to give their own kind of critique and self-assessment. Most people are actually probably harsher on themselves than you would be as a manager. So I think having that kind of opportunity for people makes a huge amount of sense.
Excellent. Well, we've got one more tip of this part. We're going to come back to tips later on. Marion says, we have consistency clinics for team leaders, so we're able to make sure all performance management is at the same level. Certainly calibration and consistency, I think, is one of the points that you brought up, Chris.
Yeah, and I think sometimes we focus on that calibration, on how we evaluating things consistently. I think what Marion's saying there, that we're looking at the kind of performance management more holistically and making sure we're consistent against applying that framework. Then that's a win for me.
Excellent. Well, I guess now's the time to jump across to Jeremy Payne from Enghouse Interactive. And Jeremy, you're going to take us through what some of the performance management tools are available to us.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, probably just to pick up on some of the things that Chris said, just to sort of link the things together a little bit. You can't stress this enough, that actually getting a clear goal set up front. So it's really interesting listening to Chris talk about LV's change in the compensation model for some of their agents and aligning it more around the corporate goals. I think it was Charlie who mentioned in the chat room the piece around aligning things around customer satisfaction. All too often when we first go in and engage with an end customer, when we ask them, what are you trying to achieve as a business, most of them can't articulate that. And if you think about, say, just a performance athlete, most of them are very clear about what their goal is. They're going to say, I want to be the Olympic champion. I want to break the world record. I want to be the world title holder. They know where they're trying to get to, and all of the supporting goals support that overarching aim. If you asked yourself as a business the same question, most organizations actually, when we first pose that question, can't answer it. And if you can't kind of articulate that in 2 or 3 sentences, almost everything else, whether it's the performance management tools, goals, feedback with the agents, is going to be out of alignment. So most of the people that we deal with are trying to solve one or more or all of these, broadly speaking, goals. And it depends. So some of them is a blend. So, if you're a low-cost airline, you're probably going to be focused more heavily around service efficiency and sales performance. If you're somebody that's sort of dealing with high net worth individuals, maybe it's customer loyalty. Quite often, when we first get called in to engage with an organization, their primary problem, number one situation, is staff loyalty. You can't solve really the other 3, opportunities without having a loyal, kind of consistent staff and agent base. If you've got a lot of churn within your business, that's an issue. So that's kind of, sometimes these goals are sequential. Sometimes they're a blend. Sometimes people aren't focused on all of them. But again, understanding what you're trying to achieve is really important. And again, when we look at a really high level, what are the approaches people are using? There's really only 3 approaches. You can look at things historically, you can look at them in real time, or you can look at them on a post-event basis. And when we look historically, that supports tools like workforce management really well. Those kind of platforms really like a bank of data over a period of a month, 6 months, to start to form a trend analysis. So we can say, okay, we know on a Monday morning we get a massive spike in calls, and we know on a Friday afternoon we get a wave of emails come in. So we're able to start to balance. Things like real-time speech analytics is a perfect kind of scenario there of being able to monitor what's going on in real time. And post-event, we tend to find people are using that a lot when they're looking to measure that emotional side. How did the customer feel the interaction went? We talked in the chat room earlier on about typically how much sampling is going on, and there were a couple of exceptional responses. I think someone said 25%, someone else was at 65%. Most other people were well below 10, and that's not untypical. Most of the organizations that we engage with at the outset are well below 10, sometimes 1, 2, 3% sample rate, and that's a random sample rate. So it's a little bit like staring through a straw if you've ever done that. Whilst you can see the world, you can only see a microscopic point of it, and you miss everything else that's going on in a margin. And that's a real problem, and it's a real problem when you're giving feedback to agents, because if you've only sampled 1 out of the 100 calls that they've done, and that's what you're basing the feedback on, you can very quickly create a demotivated agent because you picked, unfortunately, the one call or not their moment, their shining moment. So there's some of the issues that are out there, and the higher that we can get that percentage, the better. One of the other dynamics that we see in that many of our customers right now are sort of wrestling with, trying to come to terms with, is this whole concept of artificial intelligence, automated customer service, chatbots. How do you measure that? So Gartner, along with Forrester and pretty much every industry analyst, is saying in the next 2 to 3 years, around 85% of interactions are going to get handled through automated or robotic platforms. So if your overarching goal is to provide great customer service and build customer loyalty, if you're only focusing on how you're managing the agent and you're not measuring the performance of the robots or your systems or your platforms, you're kind of missing 85% of the interactions that you're handling. So that clearly needs to be something in the thinking of how you kind of build up your assessment matrix. Then start to layer in, what do your customers want? And most of your customers are actually looking for the best possible outcome they can get with the least amount of investment. So they want to be speeded through the customer journey as quickly as possible with the least amount of investment of time and energy from themselves. And I always use the example of Amazon here. That's an organization, if you ask yourself, when was the last time you phoned Amazon? Most of them have actually, done a really good job of optimizing their process so that your journey time is really quick and efficient and effortless. You get what you want without investing a huge amount of time. So one of the things that we see in terms of a KPI that more and more organizations are putting a lot more emphasis on is this concept of customer effort. And we would certainly advocate that when you're looking at what do you measure, other than just measuring the human agent performance part of it, is look at how many hoops are you making your customer jump through to get to where they want to get to. And then thinking about the softer side of things. So it's all well and good that you've ticked the boxes and can say, well, we answered the call after 3 rings. The average handle time was in our service level agreement that we have. We've done all of the things, the mechanical, easy to measure things, successfully and properly. But how did the customer feel at the end of it? And that's a huge part of it. We like to think that everything is analytical and binary, but actually emotion is a huge part of how customers are going to interact with you moving forward. Did they feel that you dealt with them in a professional way, a respectful way? Did you offer empathy? And so another key KPI that we see moving up the league table and being used more and more by the organizations we deal with is Net Promoter Score, and a whole bunch of voice of customer mechanisms feeding into that. But you do need to be able to capture that emotional part of it, and that can be harder to do. So as we look at the buckets that people have in terms of the aligning KPIs with goals, typically we see sort of 4 big buckets. People are measuring their staff, and there's a whole bunch of things and KPIs that feed into that. They're measuring their systems. Are their systems providing the people and the staff and the customers with the right outcomes? They're looking at their process and policy. So again, a bit like the Amazon example, is the process slick and efficient? And is the emotional side working? Do people feel that we care about them? Do they feel that we know them? Are we asking them their name and address when we should really already know that? So there's sort of some of the KPIs that we see in place. Then when we look at the people side of it, measuring your staff, the interaction recording is really, really useful, and we see this used more and more and more. Call recording and screen recording is great to give a sense of how that agent is doing, and sometimes highlights. So sometimes you can listen to a call and think that the agent gave the customer the wrong information, and it's only when you look at the screen recording in parallel you can see that actually the system that they were accessing to get the answer for the customer, it was the system that provided the agent with the wrong piece of information. So sometimes looking at the two in conjunction can really identify a training need for the agent, but also a system flaw as well. Indeed, it can also identify where an agent is trailing around on the screen, trying to find the right button, trying to do the right thing, and actually they don't really know where to find the information that the customer is looking for. Again, agent service evaluation, it's great for benchmarking, great for kind of keeping performance within your required kind of thresholds, but that needs to be done in a really open, transparent and fair way, and we would ideally say sort of a holistic way, so that all agents can see what's going on. You don't want people feeling that they're being measured in an unfair way, because that is just going to feed into churn. Speech analytics, phenomenal for compliance and adherence, and also phenomenal for picking up training opportunities for agents. And then workforce optimization, quite often when you see a high churn rate within a contact center, they haven't got the workforce optimization piece properly sorted. So they've either drowned their agents with a wall of phone calls, or they've put agents into a situation where they're dealing with interactions, let's say email, when they're not been properly trained or skilled up for it. So if you set someone up for failure, you're probably not going to get the outcome that you wanted. So then when we start to think about how do you measure your process, your systems and your emotions, so from the emotional side of things, speech analytics is a great kind of way to do it. Post-event surveys is good, but also the social side of it. Customers do like to share positive and negative experience through social platforms. So increasingly, we're seeing organizations put in place social harvesting tools to capture how a certain customer felt about a certain interaction. And the more that can be fed into the goals and back to the agent, the better. From a process and system point of view, there's a whole host of things. Really, most software companies, measuring how system performance is not the challenge here. The answer is what you don't measure rather than what you do measure, because you can create a wallboard with 1,000 pie charts on it. It's again coming back to that headline goal. What is actually important and what's going to drive your business forward. So then as we spin on to like a real world example, Zinc Group are an organization that we worked with. That classic kind of thing. So when we started the conversation, most people measuring 1 or 2%, that was exactly Zinc. They work in the financial services area, probably the most regulated part of that, which is debt collection. And they were sampling 1 to 2% of their calls that their agents were doing. By putting in place a real-time speech analytics platform, that's now gone up to 100%. And really, if you can imagine, as you've got, let's say you've just hired a new agent and they're sat there trying to phone someone up and collect a debt. If you've got your most experienced compliance person there, your most experienced agent who's been there for the last 5 years and knows exactly how to position things, if you've got them sat listening on that call and coaching that new agent in real time as to what to say, you're going to get a really good outcome. And what the real-time speech analytics is doing is looking in this concept at 12 different criteria. So it's looking at stress level. Is the customer becoming stressed? Is the agent becoming stressed? Is the agent speaking and talking over the top and interrupting the customer? Is the agent talking too much? All of those types of things. It's looking at system things. Is there lots of background noise? Most importantly, in this scenario, it's looking at what we would call required phrases or good phrases. So, from a regulatory point of view, you have to say certain phrases in a certain way for it to be compliant. And if a new agent comes on and says the wrong thing, that whole contract could be void. It's a little bit like me saying to you, your home will be at risk if you don't keep up repayments. That's a void contract because I was meant to say your home may be at risk. So for that one semantic error of getting the one word wrong can have a profound impact. So the software's listening in real time, picks up the fact that you've said the right things, the wrong things, flags it and coaches you to go back and correct that. And if you don't, will escalate in real time to your supervisor so that they can fix it. Another example, East Midland Housing. So this is really a case of pulling together the systems so that you're not asking customers to provide information and answers that you should already really know. And it's also about giving agents, really good real-time scorecards and evaluation so they can see where they are benchmarked against their peers and make sure that they're doing the right job in real time. And again, there's a whole bunch of things that can be fed into this, bookmarking of the audio, all of those kind of things, but really helps an agent kind of see how they're doing in real time during the course of their day. And then finally, wrap up with P&O Ferries, one of those kind of organizations that had initially got the workforce management piece out of sync and were starting to suffer a little bit from agent churn. By actually putting in place a platform that corrected that, they were really able to start to retain their staff and then start to work on the other things in terms of customer loyalty, sales improvement. So our top 5 tips to wrap up in less than a minute. The obvious one, it sounds obvious, but so many people don't spend enough time on it. Get the goals really clearly defined and map the KPIs to that. Don't just measure your people. Think about that. The robots, 85% of interactions moving through automated and self-service platforms. You've got to be measuring some of that as well. We see customer effort and net promoter score as 2 kind of key KPIs within the matrix that the organizations that we're dealing with are heavily relying upon these days. Speech analytics, when I think we looked at the poll at the start of the session, I think 2-3% of people using that right now. There's a great opportunity there to use the power of automation and computing to do a lot of the work and push that percentage right up. So in the Zeek case, goes from 1% to 100%. And then, as Chris said, continuously review what you're doing. It's not a sort of a one and done situation that once this is not a static situation. So having those live feeds and responding and reacting to them is really the big win there. So that's me done. Back to you, John T.
Thank you very much for that. I think there's a very comprehensive range of tools that could be used to improve performance over there, and certainly agent evaluation, speech analytics, workforce management, all very useful tools, tried and tested now to use. So let's have a look at some of the tips coming back from the audience. I think tying into the earlier session, keep it positive. Don't ignore the negative, but focus on ways to improve and acknowledge great work. I think it's very good to have absolutely loads and loads of tips coming through. The chat room's been very busy. Ian says, don't use out-of-date information when coaching and monitoring, and don't always try and find bad and difficult calls. Take a more balanced view. Jeremy, I guess there's always an issue on evaluations. If you're doing it sort of once a month, that that information is always going to be out of date.
Exactly. I think if you've got that kind of random manual sample approach, the probability of demotivating an agent, if you've got somebody who's turned up really working hard, putting their heart and soul into it, and you happen to have focused on the 1 or 2% of interactions that just weren't good, you may have missed the 1 or 2 that were phenomenal, and probably 80-90% of them were generally pretty good. You've missed all of that and focused on the negative. Straight away, you've got a dissatisfied agent. So that's definitely not the outcome that you're looking for. And I think people need to feel that it's fair and transparent, that they haven't been treated in an unfair way.
Interesting comment from Jana. Said last year we monitored between 1 and 3% of interactions, and we're using spreadsheets. However, as soon as we introduced quality monitoring system, a tool with proper scorecards, scoring processes, reporting, and analytics, our amounts raised up to 25%. I think that ties in, Jeremy, very well with the figures you were providing.
Exactly, and I think then you can start to feel, if you're sampling at the sort of 25% and above range, you can start to feel that you've got a degree of confidence about having that dialogue with your agents or your IT manager to improve your systems or your process. If you're trying to sort of save based on 1 or 2%, that's quite a difficult conversation to have. So that fits exactly with what we see in the field.
Ties in very nicely. Patricia says, Chris, I don't know what you think of this one. I quite like it. Find out how your people like to be managed and how to get the best out of them by using psychometric testing. That gives a more objective view on how to achieve better manager-employee relations as well. So sort of one size doesn't fit all.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a fan of psychometric testing. I think there's a place for it. Understanding people's learning styles is another one that we should be doing in terms of creating that individual approach. I think my only caveat in all of that is that we as leaders can learn about our team, but we as leaders are one of those personality types as well, and sometimes it's difficult as a leader to change your natural personality and style, so they need to be supported to do that so they can then share that. So it's just be mindful of that. If the expectation is that we are also one of those personality types, and going against our own natural personality can be tricky.
Yeah, one of the tests I often do of a team leader is to ask them on a sort of Tuesday lunchtime what each of their team did at the weekend, and that can be quite telling. Here's a question that's come in from Charlie. I know you didn't touch on this, Jeremy, in your presentation, but gamification seems to be in the news a lot. Does gamification really work, or is it just a nice, fun tool? Don't advise that you're treating them like children or drive the wrong behaviours if you make it all into a game.
I think it's one of those things, providing people, I think, with technology, you can make it as complex or as simple as you like. What we try and advocate to people is spend some time, understand those goals, and then present information back to people that directly relates to that. The smallest, least amount of information that directly relates to that goal. When we think about gamification, you can say, well, okay, that presents it in a more easy to assimilate, useful, interesting way. The reality is, when you look at where most organizations that we deal with are, gamification is really on the periphery of what's going to be important to them. Actually kind of getting the basics right, starting to be able to monitor and measure the automated systems as well as the people, and the interplay between the two is going to be far more important to them than gamifying what they're doing.
And Chris, I've seen a lot of sales gamification of who's got the highest scores, who get the biggest prize, and I think what you were saying about LV is they've sort of thrown out that whole incentive method.
Yeah, I think for me, gamification does work if it's landed in the right way. So culturally, you've got to be able to accept it. But if you focus the gamification on the individual and not create competition in terms of league tables, that's where it works. So if you think of things like, I don't know the audience, but if you think of things like TripAdvisor, so you write a review, you get certain points, you get a badge, you get whatever, and it's all about you as an individual. Similarly, if I don't know, there might be some gamers online, if you play Call of Duty, you level up as you go through. So you do certain things, you level up as you go. So if we see it So you could have 10 people achieving the same level, and they're all rewarded or all recognised for achieving that level in terms of their individual performance. That's where I see it working really well. So you do something, you get some points for that, you get a badge for that, you get whatever, and then everyone's kind of rewarded in a similar way once they achieve those levels. And it's very personal to that individual. About, I want to get to the next level, I want to move up, I want to do that. And that's where I see it working. I don't see it work so much when we start to do league tables internally. I see people get switched off a little bit around that. They don't like that kind of public display of how they're performing against their teams.
That's the problem with the league table. There's always a winner and a loser.
Exactly.
Let handlers tell you what was right or wrong in coaching sessions, and let them set their own development goals. Coaches, leaders can support these. I think that ties in what we've been saying earlier. Emma's interesting question. What are people's thoughts on agents evaluating themselves? Does this work? Chris, any pointers?
So yes, so I would say yes. So we've seen it a few times. So Motability operations a couple of years ago talked around this, around kind of taking responsibility for your own performance, doing your self-evaluation, having those conversations, identifying where you feel you need to improve or what you do particularly, and that becomes the basis of the coaching discussion and the whatever. What you'll find is we're always self-critical. We're always more self-critical than anything else, so it does generally work. But what we tend to find is we'll probably be more critical than the manager or the leader or the quality analyst or whoever it is that generally does that evaluation process. So it does work, and it does really inspire people to take ownership and accountability for their performance. That's my view on it.
And Jeremy, you'd need some different technology to do this, presumably, because you've got to allow the agent to access their own interactions.
Yeah, I mean, from a technology point of view, most of the quality management suite or systems that we bring to market will perfectly allow that. In the same way they allow the customer to measure the quality of the interaction at the end of the call or email or whatever it is. So there's certainly not an issue in terms of capturing that. But I think Chris is right. People do tend to be more self-critical than possibly their manager and agent would be, and so it's got to be part of a broader feedback mechanism for that individual. Otherwise, someone can start to paint themselves into a corner and feel like they're failing.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Take time to coach your employees. As a leader managing a team, 70% of your time should be spent on coaching your employees, says Michael. If your staff are properly trained and coached, they'll perform and reach your expectations. I see an awful lot of organizations, as people get promoted, they tend to think their job is managing their email mailbox rather than necessarily coaching staff. I saw Chris, you were nodding on that.
Yeah, it's just interesting. I think as a people leader, then the primary function is to lead people, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? That for me, when I see people not doing that and they're spending time hidden behind the desks and all that type of stuff, it does kind of, it doesn't sit right with me. Yeah, I agree with that tip.
Get your managers to do an hour or so on the phone every month, so they're able to know exactly what the advisors are dealing with. I'd also suggest that probably goes up as far as the executive team should be spending an hour or so on the phone each month. If they value customer experience, that's the place to find out about it.
I agree. You've got to, and quality analysts, all that type of stuff. I used to run a quality team, and part of their working week was actually contact centre support. So they would spend a proportion of their time actually dealing with calls, doing all that as part of their schedule each week, just to keep that kind of knowledge, that kind of foot in, the understand current pressures. It's a critical part of it.
And a simple one from Emma. Another easy one is a top manager or director to send a direct thank you email to the best performers. Certainly any good interaction. Praise is one of the best ways to do that. Michael says, don't only recognize those who have the best statistics in this team. I guess it ties in with the talk on league tables. Recognizing someone who promotes team effort or team spirit will also help those to perform better. Jeremy, there's been a lot of talk on whether you should use individual incentives or team behaviors.
Yeah, I mean, I think I mean, from a technology point of view, one of the great things is you can cut and slice, feedback in every which way you want. So you can kind of report on an individual level, a team level, a group level, a product level, a channel level, email, phone call. So, yeah, I mean, I think, again, it comes back to how that all cascades up to what you're trying to achieve as a business. So when we looked at the start of the course, Chris talked about setting that kind of clear goal. We looked at, those kind of 4 key areas, whether it's staff loyalty, customer loyalty, sales performance, or operational efficiency. It's going to be one of those 4 or a combination of one of those 4. So as long as it's kind of driving towards that, it's probably good to look at it from the top down and say, how's this helping the business, which you're back at the LV, example, and then cascade it down to a group and then a team and then an individual level.
Indeed. Well, we've unfortunately reached the end of the hour. We've got many more tips going through. So if you want to take a record of the chat log, you can do that. If you could type into your chat room, what did you like best about the webinar? If you can type that back in. We do use all of the feedback from the chat room as part of our own internal performance management reviews to see how you got on. So if you'd like to type that in. Today's winning tip. So this nice bottle of champagne goes to and that's going to go out to Patricia, who asked about how people like to be managed. You can watch a recording of this later on, which should be available actually within the hour. And if you've still got time in your diary, we're back at 2 o'clock looking at the secrets of workforce management. So just like to say thank you to our speakers. Thank you to you, Chris Rainforth from the forum.
Oh, my pleasure. I've enjoyed every minute of it. Thank you very much.
And thank you to Jeremy Payne from Enghouse Interactive. Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you all. Thanks for taking the time to listen to us. We appreciate it.
And thank you to everyone in the audience, and we'll be back on at 2 o'clock. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.